In the early hours of the morning, the streets were quiet, but inside the luxury hotels of Burkina Faso's capital, something was about to happen that would shake the world. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a protest. It was something no one had ever seen before. 7 of the richest, most powerful men in the mining world were sleeping in their expensive hotel rooms. These were men who usually walked with bodyguards, flew private jets, and had friends in high places. But that morning, they woke up to the sound of boots storming their rooms. Doors kicked open. Guns raised. No time to make a phone call. No time to run. At the exact same second, in different parts of the city, all 7 of them were arrested. This wasn't by chance. It wasn't luck. It was planned to perfection by one man, and that man was Ibrahim Traoré. Young, brave, tired of watching his people live with empty stomachs while billionaires filled their pockets with Africa's gold. That morning was the beginning of something much bigger than just arrests. It was the start of a fight to take back what rightfully belonged to the people. Now you might wonder, how did it even come to this? How could rich men with all their money and influence be taken down in one day? And why Burkina Faso, a country most people can't even find on a map? The answer is simple: because for over 50 years, they've been stealing from us. Billions of dollars worth of gold, diamonds, and other resources have been ripped from African soil, and barely anything has been given back. Think about it. Over $500 billion taken, yet only $10 billion ever reached the country's hands. That's not just theft. That's daylight robbery. While children in villages drink dirty water, CEOs drink champagne. While mothers bury their babies from hunger, these men buy more land in Europe. And all of it funded by African sweat, African pain, and African blood. And finally, someone stood up and said, "Enough." That someone was Traoré. And he wasn't alone. Behind him were millions of people who were tired of being treated like fools by men in suits from other continents. But here's the question. I want you to think about, how do you fight back against billionaires who control banks, media, and governments? How do you stop a system that's been running for half a century? Arresting these men was just the first move. What came next was even bigger. And if you stay with me, I'm going to show you exactly how it happened, step by step, so you understand why this is more than just a headline. This is a moment in history. And this isn't just Burkina Faso's fight. This is about every African country. This is about justice. This is about dignity. And this is about standing up to say, Africa is not for sale anymore. If you believe that, type it in the comments right now. Africa is not for sale. Let's tell the world together. This is just the beginning. For over 50 years, the same story kept repeating itself across Africa. Different countries, different names, but the same result. Foreign companies came here with smiles on their faces and contracts in their hands. They promised development. They promised jobs. They said, "We're here to help." But behind those handshakes were lies. Behind those contracts were tricks. Companies like Goldmax, Western Gold Mining, and Pacific Resources weren't here to help Africa. They were here to rob it, piece by piece, for decades. And they did it so well that for most of that time, nobody knew how deep the theft really went. So, how did they pull it off? It wasn't just about digging gold and leaving. No, it was smart, dirty, and evil. They made fake invoices. If they dug up 10 tons of gold in a single day, they would only report 1 ton. The other 9 tons? Gone, vanished, sold in Europe, Asia, or sent to private accounts in the Caribbean. They created fake companies to move the money around. They paid almost nothing in taxes, while the people of Burkina Faso worked like slaves in the dust and heat, breaking their backs for wages that couldn't even buy new shoes for their children. And speaking of children, meet Amadou. He's 65 now, but he spent more than 40 years working in those same mines. Every day before sunrise, he would walk barefoot for miles just to reach the site. For 12 hours straight, with barely any food, he worked under the hot sun or deep underground. And after all those years, his house is still made of mud, His children still sleep on the floor. The companies promised better lives. They lied. And Amadou is just one of millions who live that lie, day after day. But here's the part that burns the most. They didn't do it alone. These companies couldn't have robbed the country on their own. They had help. And the worst betrayal didn't come from foreigners. It came from leaders who were supposed to protect their people. Politicians, ministers, even family members of presidents, many of them sold their own people out for quick money. They shook hands with these mining bosses behind closed doors, signed dirty contracts, and walked away richer while their country stayed broken. They sold entire communities for the price of a new mansion or a luxury car. It's hard to hear, but it's true. In 2015, Burkina Faso's own energy minister took $50 million in bribes from Goldmax. And what did Goldmax get in return? Their tax rate dropped from 30% to 3%. Just think about that. They took billions of dollars in gold, but barely paid anything back to the country that gave it to them. And it wasn't just one company. Western Gold Mining did the same. In 2017, they paid $100 million to the brother of the country's president. Why? To get 3 more mining licenses. Those mines were built right on top of villages, pushing 50,000 people out of their homes. Families who had lived there for generations were kicked off their land like trash, just to make room for machines and trucks to dig for gold. And what about the value of that gold? Imagine this. Western Gold Mining pulled gold worth $60,000 from the ground. On paper, they said it was only worth $10,000. Where did the other $50,000 go? Gone. Straight into secret accounts in Switzerland, Dubai, and other places where African governments couldn't reach. All of it stolen in daylight. And while the gold left Africa, poverty stayed. It wasn't just about money either. It was about human life. In some places, children as young as 10 were forced to work underground, crawling through tight tunnels with no safety, breathing in toxic dust, breaking rocks with their bare hands, their childhood stolen before they even had a chance to enjoy it. In other places, rivers were poisoned with chemicals like cyanide used to separate gold from rock. Villages that used to drink from clean rivers started getting sick. Cancer cases went through the roof. In 17 villages alone, cancer rates increased by 10 times. Now, meet Miriam. She's a mother of 3 from one of those poisoned villages. With tears in her eyes, she once said, "My children drank water that was poison and I didn't even know. By the time we found out, it was too late." Her youngest daughter, just 7 years old, was already coughing blood by then. And the men responsible? They were sitting in 5-star hotels, eating steak and drinking wine, while children like Miriam's were dying slowly from chemicals dumped into their water. For too long, this was life in many parts of Africa. The rich got richer, the poor got poisoned. Entire villages disappeared just for mining trucks to roll through. Leaders took bribes, families were pushed into the dirt, kids were sent underground to risk their lives while billionaires smiled for cameras overseas, and nobody seemed to care. But then, finally, someone did. Ibrahim Traoré had seen enough. He didn't want speeches. He didn't want more promises. He wanted action. Quietly, he started working behind the scenes, gathering documents, studying financial records, bringing in legal experts from around the world. Piece by piece, the puzzle started to come together, and what he found was worse than anyone expected. This wasn't just a case of unpaid taxes. This was a criminal empire hiding behind business suits and expensive watches. And Traoré wasn't scared. He knew the risks. He knew they would call him names, threaten him, maybe even try to kill him. But he didn't care, because standing behind him were millions of people, minors, mothers, children, who had been robbed for far too long. And finally, the world was about to find out that Africa was not going to stay silent anymore. This was no longer just about money. This was about dignity. This was about justice. And it was just the beginning. It was 6 a.m. when the storm hit. The capital city of Burkina Faso was still waking up, but inside the fancy hotels, panic had already taken over. In room after room, some of the richest men on earth stood frozen in shock. These weren't ordinary men. These were the bosses of mining companies that controlled billions of dollars. Men who usually made presidents answer their calls, but now they were standing in their silk pajamas, faces pale, eyes wide, surrounded by special forces pointing rifles at them. Some tried to act brave. One CEO shouted at his bodyguards to protect him, but it was too late. The special forces had already taken over the building. Others tried to run. Jean-Claude Dubois, head of Western Gold Mining, was halfway to the airport when the military blocked his convoy. His private jet was sitting on the runway, engines on, ready to fly. But Traoré had planned for that too. The airspace had been closed hours earlier. Every border, every road, every airport sealed tight. No one was getting out. Viktor Petrov, the head of Goldmax, stood by the window of his luxury suite, watching soldiers storm the hotel lobby. He was holding his phone, trying to call someone for help, but no one answered. His bank accounts had been frozen overnight. The millions he thought would save him were locked, unreachable. Across town, Australian mining boss Michael Thompson was caught in the middle of a video call with his partners. His laptop was still open when the soldiers entered, showing bank transactions he was trying to move out of the country. That open screen became evidence. They caught him in the act. This wasn't luck. This was months of hard planning. Ibrahim Traoré and his team had worked in silence, watching, gathering, preparing. They used spy networks to place informants inside the mining offices. They flew drones over the mining fields to see what was really being taken out of the ground. They used satellite photos to track secret shipments. And the final blow? They hacked company emails. What they found in those messages was not just greed, it was pure disrespect. One email from a Western gold mining executive called the people of Burkina Faso stupid villagers. Another email from Goldmax's boardroom talked about child workers in the mines as cheap labor that doesn't complain. One message read, instead of paying $100 to one adult, give $10 to 10 kids. Same result. No noise. This was how they talked about African children. This was how they saw Africa, not as a home for proud, hard-working people, but as a gold mine full of silent slaves. They thought nobody would ever see those messages. They thought nobody would ever dare touch them. They were wrong. Traoré wasn't done yet. He didn't want these men to be judged in secret courts with quiet deals behind the scenes. He wanted the world to see. He created a special court just for this case. No European or American judges, only judges from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, countries that knew exactly what it felt like to be robbed by powerful nations in the name of business. Finally, the game was being played on fair ground. When the trial began, the charges were read out loud, one by one. Viktor Petrov alone faced 234 separate charges: bribery, tax evasion, environmental destruction, forced displacement. The list was endless. Jean-Claude Dubois faced 189 charges, including the most disgusting one of all, using child labor in deadly mines. It wasn't just words. It was proven in court with videos, pay slips, even death certificates of children who never made it past their teenage years because of lung disease from the dust-filled tunnels. Then came the moment that broke everyone's heart. Musa, a young man now 23 years old, stood in front of the courtroom. When he was just 8, he started working underground. No sunlight, no fresh air. Every breath filled his lungs with poison. Now, at just 23, his body was already breaking down, coughing, struggling to breathe. With tears in his eyes, he said, "They stole my childhood. They stole my health. They took everything, my life, my strength, my future. Would you forgive that? Could you stay silent if that was your son? Your brother?" It wasn't just children who suffered. Villages were wiped out to make room for machines. Families were pushed into the dirt, while the people responsible sat in mansions thousands of miles away. And when those families got sick from the poisoned water, the companies simply wrote them off as acceptable losses. While the trial was happening, the world started to shake. European Union leaders rushed into emergency meetings. The United States threatened sanctions. France's President Macron went on live television, pointing his finger, warning Traoré that there would be consequences. They didn't even hide it. To them, the crime wasn't the theft of Africa's wealth. It was daring to stop it. But Traoré didn't blink. When they called him a dictator, he smiled. When they said, "You will pay for this," he calmly replied, "We are applying the law. For 50 years you broke every rule, stole from us, poisoned our people, and thought nobody would speak up. Well, we are speaking now." And when they said, "You can't treat investors like this," Traoré said something that shook the whole room. Investors? No, these are not investors. These are thieves dressed in suits. We welcome real investors. We do not welcome criminals. The tension grew thicker with every passing day. The whole world was watching. News headlines from London to New York were screaming, "Burkina Faso's leader sparks global crisis." But inside Africa, a different story was unfolding. Crowds filled the streets, raising homemade signs that said, "Our gold is ours." Young people chanted Traoré's name. Old men raised their fists. Women wept with joy. For the first time in their lives, they saw someone standing up for them, not in speeches, but in action. But here was the big question. Could Traoré hold his ground? Could this small African country really take on some of the most powerful forces on earth? The banks, the media, the governments. Could they fight back without breaking? Or would they be crushed like every other leader who tried before? Stay with me. Because what happened next shocked the entire world. When the verdict was finally announced, the whole courtroom went silent. Even the air felt heavy. But then, one by one, the sentences came down like thunder. Guilty. 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 All 7 CEOs were found guilty on all charges. Victor Petrov from Goldmax, 50 years in prison plus a $10 billion fine. Jean-Claude Dubois from Western Gold, 45 years in prison, $8 billion. Michael Thompson from Pacific Resources, life in prison for poisoning rivers and killing thousands. Every single one of them sentenced. No deals. No soft treatment, no hiding behind lawyers. For the first time ever, the people who robbed Africa were the ones behind bars, not the ones giving orders. But it didn't stop there. Every single personal asset they owned was seized. Private jets, yachts, fancy homes by the beach, expensive artwork. All of it was taken by the state, and not to sit in some warehouse collecting dust. The court ordered that everything be sold. And the money used to build schools, hospitals, and clean water systems for the very people these companies tried to destroy. It was justice in real time. It was the kind of ending that poor families in Burkina Faso never believed they would see. In their lifetime, the change was fast. In just 1 year after those arrests, Burkina Faso looked like a new country. The $100 billion seized from those mining companies didn't sit in some bank. It went to work. Over 500 schools were built from scratch. More than 200 hospitals opened their doors. Roads that were once nothing but dirt were now smooth highways, connecting villages that had been isolated for generations. Electricity finally reached places that had only known darkness. Clean, drinkable water flowed in places where people used to walk for hours just to find a dirty river. And those mines, they didn't close, they didn't stop. But now they were under new management, the people's management. Child labor was gone for good. Workers who used to risk their lives for a few dollars a week now earned real wages, enough to feed their families, build homes, send their kids to school. Accidents that used to kill dozens of miners every year dropped to zero because the new leadership put safety before profit. For men like Amadou, this wasn't just about numbers. It was personal. After 40 years of hard labor and broken promises, he could finally send his children to school wearing shoes. His grandchildren would not have to crawl through tunnels to survive. For the first time in his life, Amadou said the word justice and actually felt it. But this story didn't just stop at Burkina Faso's borders. Something was changing across the whole continent. In Guinea, the government nationalized its bauxite mines. In Mali, CEOs of foreign companies were arrested for the same crimes. In Niger, uranium mining contracts signed by corrupt leaders were cancelled and the resources brought back under national control. A new wind was blowing across Africa. For the first time, African countries were standing up not just in words, but in action. Africa had awakened. Through it all, Ibrahim Traoré remained steady. He didn't run from the cameras. He stood tall and spoke clearly to the world. "Africa is not for sale," he said. "Not anymore." And then he added something even more important. "This is not the end of the fight. This is just the beginning." That message was not just for Burkina Faso. It was for everyone who had ever been robbed, tricked, or made to feel small. It was a message to young Africans growing up right now, to the miners, the farmers, the students, that they didn't have to accept poverty while others got rich off their land. This is the kind of story we need to tell the world.